The lake was calm that morning, like always. Mist curled over the surface, catching the early light. Birds skimmed across the water, and for a few peaceful minutes, it looked just like it had for decades. But something felt different. I could see movement beyond the trees, construction. I grabbed my binoculars, stepped onto the back porch of my cabin, and aimed them toward the far edge of my property. My stomach dropped. More trucks. More concrete. More frames going up. The number of homes had nearly doubled in just a few months. I counted 25. No, there were over 40. I stood there frozen, watching a bulldozer roll across the ridge that sloped toward my lake. Not their lake. Legally. Surveyed and registered. My name on every inch of it. And yet the HOA had decided to build there anyway, pretending like I didn't exist. It hadn't always been like this. 5 years ago, this was nothing but wilderness and peace. I'd bought the land after retiring early, used to be military, then law enforcement. I wanted quiet. A lakeside property with its own dam and a small cabin. Something to fish on. Something to breathe in. Then a developer bought land nearby. Then came the HOA. They said they wanted to beautify the lakeside region. I didn't think much of it, figured they'd build a few homes, maybe pave a new road or two. But they had other plans. They started building faster than I could blink. Each new house crept closer to the lake, chewing up trees, flattening earth, and pushing property lines. At first, I thought it was just sloppy surveying. But then came the fences. Signs. Even a public dock, right on my shoreline. When I brought it up, they brushed me off. This is all within the HOA community now, one of the board members told me. The lake's for everyone. I laughed. Then I showed them the deed. They didn't care. I filed a complaint with the county. Nothing. Hired a lawyer. He sent a cease and desist. The HOA sent back a notice saying I was interfering with community development. That I was the one trespassing. They even had the nerve to send me a fine. Things escalated when I caught one of their contractors cutting trees on my land without a permit. I confronted the guy. He said he was just doing what the HOA told him. No paperwork. No apology. That same week, they poured a concrete walkway that extended into the water. They added benches. Then lights. It looked like a city park. On my private lake. The tipping point came one evening when I was out fishing. I heard laughter behind me and turned to find a group of teenagers jumping off a newly built platform, another one that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago. They were from the HOA's newest subdivision. They thought it was theirs. That I was the outsider. I tried talking to the HOA president again. A smug guy named Curtis who wore loafers to the construction site like he was heading to a golf course. He barely let me speak before saying, "It's done. We have permits. You can sue, but you won't win. Just join the HOA. It'll be easier." He patted me on the shoulder like I was some old man in his way. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just walked away and started thinking. See, there was one thing Curtis didn't know. The lake only existed because of a small, decades-old dam. Built by the original landowners. Maintained by me. Hidden behind a thicket of trees at the far end of the property. Without that dam, there'd be no lake. Just a long, muddy valley. I walked down to the dam the next morning. Looked at the overflow valve. It hadn't been touched in years, but it worked fine. There were no laws stopping me from draining my own private lake. No one even knew how it functioned. Not the HOA. Not the city. I stared at the valve for a long time. And I made a decision. I didn't act right away. I spent the next few days just watching. Watching their workers, their trucks, their little golf carts buzzing back and forth like they owned the place. Every hour, something new appeared. A fresh pile of lumber, a new patch of concrete, a stack of insulation. They weren't slowing down, they were speeding up. The part that really burned was the way they ignored my property line like it didn't exist. Their survey flags were planted 10, 20 feet into my side of the ridge. One morning I walked out and saw they'd even set up a temporary generator, smack in the middle of my fishing trail. They were bold now. Confident. Like I'd already lost. A neighbor from across the lake came by and quietly warned me that the HOA was planning to install sewer lines along the backwoods, lines that would cut directly through my land. I didn't believe it at first. But 2 days later, I spotted orange spray paint on the ground. Survey markers. Fresh ones. I took pictures. Called the county again. They transferred me 3 times, then left me on hold for half an hour. When I finally got someone, they told me the permits were being reviewed, but that community growth in the area was considered a priority. In other words, they weren't going to stop them. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the lights across the water. House after house lit up. Porch lights. Garden lights. String lights wrapped around patio fences. The lake was reflecting it all like some fake resort brochure. And I realized something. They didn't just take land. They took the night. The silence. The stars. It wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was personal. They had erased every trace of the place I had built. And if I let them continue, they'd erase me too. Just a quiet old man who didn't fight back hard enough. So I began preparing. The dam was old but solid. I checked the spillway gates, cleaned out debris, made sure the runoff path was clear. It had never been opened all the way before, just a slow drain in spring to keep the level steady. But now, I was planning something bigger. Still, I didn't want chaos. I wasn't trying to hurt people. I didn't want anyone getting swept away or losing their lives. I just wanted the message to land like a brick through their boardroom window. This lake is mine. And without it, all your lakeside dreams? Worthless. I waited for the right moment. A long weekend was coming up. Most of the workers would be gone. A few homeowners would be out of town. I checked the weather, clear skies. No added runoff. Perfect. But just as I was locking everything in, Curtis showed up again. Uninvited. Wearing that same smug smile. He pulled up in his shiny SUV, parked half on my gravel driveway like he owned it, and stepped out holding a folder. Thought I'd stop by and offer you one last chance to come to the table, he said, like we were at a business conference instead of standing on the edge of my stolen land. He opened the folder and showed me a proposal. They'd buy me out. Their plan was to integrate my property into the HOA. A generous offer, he said. Above market value. A win-win. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the spot behind him where my trees used to stand, now replaced by concrete footers and construction debris. He kept talking. About growth. About value. About being reasonable. Then he made a mistake. He said, honestly, it's just a lake. A pretty one, sure. But it's replaceable. That was it. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't throw the folder. Just nodded, turned around, and walked back to the house. He thought that was the end of it. But I had already decided what came next. The lake would go. Just like the trees. Just like the quiet. And when it did, they'd all remember who it actually belonged to. I woke up before sunrise. The sky was still dark, just a thin line of light creeping over the horizon. The lake looked peaceful, almost innocent. But beneath that stillness was pressure, silent and steady, building behind the old dam wall. I packed a small bag, grabbed my tools, and hiked the narrow path through the woods. The air was cool, and every step on the dirt trail felt heavier than the last. I could hear distant voices already. Construction had started early on the other side of the lake. Hammering. Engines rumbling. Ladders clinking. They had no idea what was coming. The dam sat at the far end, tucked behind tall grass and thick trees. Most people didn't even know it was there. That was the point. It was small but sturdy, made of concrete and steel, built back when the land was a family-owned cattle ranch. I'd done yearly maintenance on it since I bought the property. No one else touched it. No one else even asked. I crouched down beside the release valve. Rusted but still strong. I turned the handle slowly, just a quarter turn to start. Water hissed through the pipe. It wasn't much yet, just a steady trickle spilling out into the dry creek bed below. The creek would swell soon, winding its way through the woods and down toward the highway. I checked the backup gate, unlocked it, and gave it a test crank. Smooth. No resistance. Everything was ready. I stood up and looked out over the lake. The sun was rising now, casting long orange streaks across the water. I could see rooftops glinting in the distance. All 47 of them. Some were still under construction. Others already had people living inside. Walking dogs, sipping coffee on porches, waving at one another like this was their lake. They'd paved walking paths down to the shoreline, built fire pits. One home even had a floating dock, complete with a little paddleboat tied to it. All of it based on a lie. Their dream homes sat barely 10 feet above the waterline. I didn't rush it. I gave the system a few hours to drain naturally, slowly lowering the lake without raising suspicion. The water receded inch by inch. Turtles and frogs began to shift toward the center. Fish stirred near the surface, following the dropping level. The birds noticed first. They circled above in confused loops. By noon, the shorelines looked strange: muddy edges, exposed rocks, roots that had been underwater for years now breathing air. Still, no one said anything. They probably thought it was seasonal, normal, something the HOA handled. At 2 in the afternoon, I made my way back to the dam. I tightened my gloves, gave one last look behind me, then gripped the main release lever and pulled it hard. It groaned, then snapped loose with a heavy clunk. The sound that followed was deep, like the earth clearing its throat. Water surged from the dam's mouth, roaring down the dry channel, picking up branches, mud, old leaves. The flow gained speed fast, growing wider, louder. The lake began to churn. The surface dipped visibly, swirling near the center like a slow-moving whirlpool. I stood back and watched as the water pulled itself into the dam's throat, draining years of peace, years of memories, along with every careless foundation the HOA had laid. Within the hour, their little docks tilted sideways, then cracked. Deck furniture slid down the now exposed mud banks. Lawns wrinkled and sagged. Concrete paths split. The floating dock broke loose and drifted into the middle of the shrinking lake, spinning slowly like a warning sign. I knew it wouldn't destroy the homes. That wasn't the point. I wasn't trying to ruin lives. But what I did destroy was their illusion. That they were in control. That they could build whatever they wanted, wherever they pleased. That my lake was theirs to profit from. By evening, the lake had turned into a muddy basin. Water still trickled through the dam gate, but the once wide mirror of glass was now a cracked, brown memory. And for the first time in months, the night was quiet. No paddleboats. No porch music. Just the sound of frogs returning and the wind through dry cattails. They didn't see it coming, but they would feel it. The first reaction came from a teenager. He stood at the edge of what used to be the shoreline, holding a fishing rod and staring at the cracked mud where water had once lapped gently. He looked confused, like he'd walked into the wrong backyard. Behind him, 2 dogs barked nonstop from one of the newly built decks. The paddleboat that used to be tied to their dock now sat grounded in the center of the dry basin, tilted like a forgotten toy. I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the show unfold. By mid-morning, the HOA's maintenance crew arrived in 2 carts. They circled the lake slowly, stopping every few hundred feet, pointing, whispering, making phone calls. I saw one of them kneel and touch the mud with his glove. Another shook his head and walked away, kicking rocks. Curtis showed up just after lunch. He came down the main path in his SUV again, but this time he wasn't smiling. He parked, stepped out fast, and stared across the drained lake like he'd discovered a crime scene. His sunglasses slid down his nose as he scanned the damage. He stormed up my driveway without knocking and shouted from 10 feet away. What the hell happened? I didn't even get up from my chair. I told him the truth, calmly, evenly. It's my dam. My lake. I decided to drain it. He blinked, like he hadn't really processed the words. What? I drained my lake. On my land. There's no law saying I have to keep water for other people's houses. He pointed toward the basin, the docks, the mud-covered benches. This is thousands of dollars in community loss. I raised an eyebrow. Community? Or the HOA's investment? He didn't answer. Just paced in a tight circle, muttering to himself. His phone rang. He answered, argued with someone for a few minutes, then hung up and glared at me. You've ruined everything we built. I sipped my coffee. You shouldn't have built it on stolen land. That shut him up. He stormed back to his car, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. But he didn't leave. He just sat there for a long while, phone in his lap, watching the basin like he expected it to fill back up if he stared long enough. By the next day, rumors had spread across the entire neighborhood. One lady from Lot 12 came over with a clipboard, asking questions like she was taking a survey. Was it an accident? Is the lake damaged permanently? Will the HOA be installing pumps to restore it? I told her she might want to talk to her board about why they built homes next to a lake they didn't own. She looked stunned. Wait, you own the lake? From tree line to dam. And every drop in between. She left without another word. Then came the emails. The HOA sent 3 in one day, first demanding an explanation, then warning of consequences, then asking to schedule a friendly resolution meeting. I ignored all of them. My lawyer had copies of everything. Survey maps. Even drone photos taken months ago showing where the construction had pushed over the line. Curtis returned a few days later, this time with 2 other board members and a man in a beige suit who introduced himself as their attorney. He didn't yell like Curtis. He spoke politely, like someone trained to convince rather than argue. He said the homeowners were upset. That property values had already dropped. That local news had started asking questions. That maybe we could come to an agreement to restore the lake and stabilize the neighborhood. I asked him if the HOA was ready to acknowledge they had built on land they didn't own. He hesitated. Well, we believe there may have been a misunderstanding in the easement agreements. I cut him off. You didn't misunderstand. You just didn't care. They left without shaking hands. After that, the truck stopped coming. The workers disappeared. A few unfinished homes stood half-built, skeletons of someone else's dream. The mud hardened. Weeds began to grow. The paddle boat stayed right where it was, rusting in the sun. And the HOA? They went quiet. But the lake still wasn't coming back. Not yet. Not until they learned who the land really belonged to. The first house went up for sale within a week. Lot 17. A 2-story home with fake stone trim and a lakefront view that now stared directly into a field of cracked mud and broken dreams. The listing disappeared after 3 days. Nobody wanted it. The pictures still showed a full lake, but any buyer who drove out there would see the truth instantly. The water was gone. The illusion was broken. More listings followed. Lot 9. Lot 22. Lot 5. Each one popped up and faded away, like a bad secret the HOA couldn't hide anymore. Homeowners were starting to panic. I saw them walking the edge of the dried basin every evening, holding hands, shaking heads. Some called the county. Others complained on the neighborhood app. But nobody wanted to take responsibility. That's when they started knocking on my door. It began with one couple. They brought a small pie, tried to smile through the awkward tension. We didn't know, they said. We thought this was a community lake. The realtor told us it was shared land. I showed them the survey map. The boundary line was clear as daylight. It was never shared, I said. Your HOA lied to you. They looked defeated. More residents came in the following days. Some angry, some desperate, some simply curious. They all wanted to know the same thing. Was I going to refill the lake? I didn't give them false hope. I told them the truth. Not until the HOA admits what they did and pays for the damage. Some didn't take it well. A man from Lot 33 called me selfish. Said I was punishing innocent people. I asked him if he ever questioned how they had lake access without owning the lake. He didn't answer. Then came the media. A local news truck showed up one afternoon. A young reporter knocked on my door while her cameraman adjusted his lens beside the mailbox. She asked for a statement. I gave it. The HOA built on land they didn't own. They ignored warnings. They ignored legal boundaries. So I drained my private lake. I don't owe them anything. They ran the story the next morning. The headline read, Lakeside War, Homeowner Drains HOA's Dreams Dry. I kept the paper. The fallout hit fast. Real estate signs multiplied. HOA meetings turned chaotic. Residents demanded answers. Curtis disappeared from the neighborhood app. Rumor was he stepped down as president. I didn't miss him. Then came the lawsuits, one from a homeowner who had spent his life savings building what he thought was a Lakeview dream home. Another from a contractor who claimed unpaid wages after the HOA halted construction. And finally, a letter addressed to me. Not from a neighbor. From the HOA's new legal representative. They wanted to talk. Not threaten. Not bully. Just We scheduled a meeting in a neutral space, the local library's conference room. Clean table. No suits. No posturing. Just 3 people from their side, and me with a file folder and a calm stare. They started with apologies. Real ones. Not the legal kind. Then they explained that the new board had no idea how deep the old leadership's mess went. That dozens of homes were technically encroaching by feet or more. That permits had been rushed and property lines ignored. And that now they were sitting on a lawsuit magnet. They asked if I'd consider restoring the lake. Offered to pay for repairs. Offered to pay me. They called it a gesture of community healing. I listened. And I made them a deal. I told them I'd rebuild the dam gates. I'd slowly refill the lake over a few months, on my schedule, with my conditions. But only after they held a public meeting and announced on record that the land belonged to me. That the lake was mine. And that any future access would require a signed lease, renewed yearly. No assumptions. No free rides. They didn't like it. But they agreed. And just like that, the HOA swallowed its pride. But the lake? It still sat dry. And I wasn't in a hurry. It rained the day before the meeting. Not a heavy storm, just a slow, steady shower that softened the dry earth and sent tiny rivers of water sliding into the cracks of the lake bed. I stood at the edge that morning, boots sinking slightly into the damp mud, watching nature slowly try to fix what greed had broken. The basin was quiet. No construction, no laughing kids, no shouting contractors, just the whisper of rain and the distant hum of birds returning. The public meeting was held in the community hall the HOA had built months ago, back when they thought they were building a new lakeside utopia. Now it looked like a courtroom. Folding chairs lined up in nervous little rows. Homeowners filled every one of them. I recognized most of their faces, some embarrassed, some angry, some just tired. I didn't sit. I stood near the back and waited. The new HOA president, a woman named Denise, stepped up to the mic. She looked nervous but determined. Papers in her hands. Sweat on her brow. "Thank you all for coming today," she began. "We're here to address the situation with the lake and the property it sits on. It's time we stop avoiding the truth." The room shifted. Whispers. A cough. A baby cried somewhere in the corner. Denise continued. "We've reviewed the original surveys, the land records, and the county filings. And we can now confirm, officially and publicly, that the lake and the land surrounding it were never part of the HOA. They were, and still are, private property. Owned by Mr. Harris." I watched the ripple move through the crowd. A few gasps. Some lowered heads. One man muttered something under his breath, clearly shocked. Denise didn't stop. "We also acknowledge that under the previous board's leadership, construction was carried out that overstepped boundaries and violated property rights. We cannot change what was done, but we can take responsibility for it." Now she looked at me. "Mr. Harris has agreed to allow the lake to be restored under certain conditions, which we will honor. These include public acknowledgement of ownership, legal agreements for access, and yearly leases for any future usage of the shoreline or water." She paused, and for a moment, the room was silent. And then applause. Not from everyone, but from enough. A slow clap from the back, then others joined in. Some were clapping out of relief. Some out of respect. Some just wanted to move on. But it didn't matter. The truth had been said out loud. And that changed everything. After the meeting, people approached me one by one. Some apologized. Others just nodded. A few tried to make conversation, like we were old neighbors now that the air was cleared. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. That evening, I walked back to the dam. The rain had stopped, but puddles still lined the trail. I checked the gates. No damage, no pressure buildup. Everything was in place. The flow valve was ready. I gave it a half turn. Water began to pour out slowly from the reservoir I'd built up in the creek over the last few days. Not a flood, just a whisper of life returning. A gentle stream, curling through the rocks and sliding into the wide bowl of the lake basin. I decided the refill would take weeks. No rush. Let them wait. Let the silence teach them patience. By morning, the birds were louder. Frogs began to gather again along the edge. Kids stood in their backyards, pointing and whispering about the rising waterline. Their parents stayed quiet, unsure what to say. Curtis never showed his face again. The HOA stopped sending emails. And for the first time in nearly a year, I walked along the old shoreline without feeling like a trespasser on my own land. No fences. No construction tape. No angry men in suits pretending the lake belonged to them. It was just me, the trees, and the slow, steady sound of water returning home. I started getting letters in the mail again, but these weren't threats. They were invitations. Offers. Requests. Would you be open to hosting a small fishing event for the community? One read. Another said, our kids used to love kayaking. Can we arrange a rental agreement? A third came with a gift card tucked inside, offering to lease a section of shoreline for seasonal access. I didn't answer most of them. Not because I was bitter, but because silence had done more for me than any argument ever could. When the lake dried up, so did the arrogance. And now that it was coming back, they wanted back in, but on new terms. My terms. A few families got the message early. They were the ones who showed up not with contracts, but with shovels. They helped clear debris from the old walking trails. They asked before stepping on the land. One man offered to fix the rotted dock planks that had shifted during the drought. I let him. Slowly, trust crept back in, not the kind that comes from documents, but the quiet kind that grows when people finally see the line they're not supposed to cross. The lake began to look like itself again. Shorelines softened. Green returned. The water, still shallow in places, had enough reflection to catch the sky again. I saw herons land near the far side, standing tall in the new reeds. Deer tiptoed to the edge in the morning mist. Nature was returning before the HOA ever fully did. But not everyone got the message. A man from Lot 14, new, loud, overly confident, marched down to my porch one afternoon with a rolled-up blueprint under his arm. I've got a plan, he said. We build a floating pavilion. Right out there. He pointed toward the middle of the lake like he owned the view. A shared platform. Music nights, movie screenings, paddleboard rentals. A way to bring life back to this place. I let him talk for 3 whole minutes before I stood up. I walked down the porch steps and stood between him and the water. No, I said. Just that. Plain and final. He opened his mouth again, probably to explain how it would benefit the community, but I cut him off before he got the words out. This isn't a community lake. It's private. You're standing on it right now. And that blueprint? It means nothing here. He didn't come back. The HOA eventually formalized the lease program. Seasonal permits, annual contracts, limited dock access. All reviewed by me. No hidden fine print. No assumed rights. Just paper with my signature or no deal at all. The lake wasn't stolen anymore. It was earned, inch by inch, through respect. Curtis? Never saw him again. Word was he sold his house at a loss and moved out of state. Couldn't handle the looks. Couldn't face what he'd built on a lie. The new board played it safe. Quiet events, respectful communication, and a lot of listening. Denise made sure of it. She knew they were lucky the whole mess hadn't ended in lawsuits and news cameras camped outside the gates. But every now and then, someone tried to test the boundaries. I'd find a canoe tied to a tree without permission. Or spot teenagers sneaking onto the dock at night. I never made a scene. I just left a small note, folded and pinned where they'd see it. Private property. You're welcome to ask. But never assume. They got the message. The thing is, the lake didn't just change them, it changed me too. I had learned what happened when you stay silent too long. When you let others chip away at your land, your space, your peace. They take and take and take, until there's nothing left that feels like yours. So now, I walk the shoreline every morning. Just to feel the soil under my boots. Just to remind myself it's still mine. The water's back. The air is clean again. And the line? The one they tried to erase? It's carved into the earth now, deeper than ever. The water was almost back to where it used to be. You could see the old levels marked in the trunks of the trees, darkened bands where the lake once kissed the bark, where sunlight never touched. Those lines were slowly disappearing again, being swallowed by the rising water. It was like watching time rewind. Kids played on the edge now, the smarter ones keeping to the permitted spots. Parents lingered nearby, more cautious than before. They kept their voices down when they passed my fence. Some nodded. A few even said thank you. I didn't reply, but I heard them. The HOA had put up new signs. Lake access by lease only, private property. They were posted on every path, every trail, even near the new homes that once claimed their open access. Some of those homes were still empty. Buyers backed out. Others were rented out quietly, with no mention of the view. Hard to sell a lake dream after the lake itself stood up and proved a point. The floating pavilion guy? Never heard from him again. His blueprint probably still sat rolled up in some drawer next to broken promises and bad investments. But Denise, the new HOA president, she kept her word. She called once a month. Not to pressure, not to pry. Just to check in. Do you want us to trim the path near the west dock? Are you okay with a one-day canoe race next month if all permits are signed? Would you like to review the lease renewals before we send them out? Every time, she gave me the power to say no. And most times I said yes. Not because I forgave what happened, but because it finally felt like the land was speaking for itself again, and someone was listening. I rebuilt parts of the dock myself. Not to share, but because I missed the feel of it under my boots. The old boards had rotted during the dry months, warped and cracked under the sun. I used thick cedar this time. Stronger. Stubborn. Like the land. Like me. Some nights, I'd sit out there and just listen. To frogs croaking. To wind brushing the tall grass. To the way water gently smacks against wood when the world finally goes quiet. And I'd look out across the surface and remember how close it had come to being lost. All because someone thought paperwork mattered more than ownership. That a shiny brochure and a sales pitch could overwrite land rights and personal space. They learned the hard way. But I think that's the only way some people learn. The damage they did didn't just vanish when the water came back. Roots were still torn. Trails still worn down. Wildlife still skittish. It'll take years before it feels whole again. But the process, that slow healing, was mine to guide. Once, someone asked me if I'd ever sell. You could name your price, they said. Developers would throw money at you. I looked out at the lake that evening, still, reflective. The sky dipped in red and orange. No, I said. Some things don't have a price. They nodded like they understood. But I'm not sure they really did. Because owning something isn't just about a name on a deed. It's about protecting it, fighting for it. Holding the line when no one else will. The HOA thought I was just one man standing in the way of progress. But they never understood what that lake meant. That dam. That quiet. That view. Now they do. And every morning when they wake up and see the water glistening out their back windows, every time they hear a loon call or the ripple of a breeze across the surface, they're reminded of the one truth they can't rewrite or fine away. The lake came back because I let it. Not them. Not their money. Not their permits.